Today, we're going to be talking about the great pretenders. It's political season. So, some of the pretenders are people who are candidates. Many of the pretenders are people who pretend to inform us in our mainstream media. Actually, that's probably a good place to start. We'll do it right after this.
Press clever bias, all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.
Welcome to Nowhere to Hide. I'm Brian Hyde. Twice a week, I get the chance to sit down and go over some of the lesser seen or maybe sometimes lesser known aspects of what our mainstream or legacy media are talking about. And today is a good day. In fact, I actually have some good news to share with you, and I think a rare example of some good objective reporting from a very unlikely source. But before we go there, I have to point out that with the primary election fast approaching, the political ads are flying fast and furious. And as difficult as it must be for candidates to run against their opponents, in many cases, candidates, particularly those who are in any way conservative, find themselves having to run against a hostile legacy media as well. And oftentimes that hostility is explained as, hey, now we're just trying to do our part to defend our democracy, which leads me to a starting point here with a quote from Fred Reed, one of my favorite curmudgeons, but also a guy who seems to get a lot of things right. Fred tells us democracy may not be the silliest idea concocted by man, but for anything larger than a small town, it is crackpot. It consists in the idea that a public, on average knowing almost nothing, can choose leaders in popularity contests among provincial lawyers who know little more and are required to know nothing except how to get elected. Now, Fred's piece where he's talking about this is primarily talking about our ignorance on matters related to national security. I mean, people will opine, well, China's really bad or Russia's really bad. And yet you ask them, can you name a city in China besides Shanghai or Hong Kong or Beijing? Most people just sit there and do a good impression of a brook trout because they don't know. They only know what comes to them through mainstream media sources. And in that sense, democracy is simply the people who are most easily led to vote for a particular candidate in a popularity contest, which is what elections really are. Now, having said that, there are candidates out there and there are people out there who run for office who I believe do so for the right reasons. They understand and they believe in good government, limited government, the protection of God-given rights, fiscal responsibility, and all that. Others seem to be the power seekers and opportunists, and those are the ones that we want to avoid. Unfortunately, they seem to have almost an unfair advantage when it comes to the kinds of ads that are run, as well as the hostile media coverage that's provided for those who do have principles and threaten to limit the size and scope of government. It goes with the territory. So an interesting note here from Action Idaho. 2 weeks until the Idaho primary, things are heating up on Idaho X. And by the way, Twitter is very, very active right now. Idaho's lamestream media seems to be running interference, criticizing ads attacking rhinos, while simultaneously running attack ads on conservatives. Senator Lenny calls them out for their hypocrisy. Now, interestingly enough, Senator Lenny was approached by Andrew Bartline with Channel 7 News to do an interview with him about what Andrew called deceptive ads that are being run against Senator Lenny, as well as a couple of other senators who have been specifically targeted. And I got to say, I watched the news story. I didn't have high expectations just because, let's just say that Channel 7 has consistently, I think, let down people who are looking for objective reporting. This was an exception, though, and kudos need to be given to Andrew Bartline for doing a very good job of presenting facts, especially facts which really run kind of counter to the narrative that typically is found there. I think this was made just a little bit sweeter with the fact that Brian Holmes was sitting beside him for this segment, looking like he just took a giant suck on a sour lemon. As I don't know that it went so well for him, but anyway, Andrew reached out to Senator Brian Lenny and said, "Look, hey." Senator Lenny, this is Andrew Bartline at Channel 7 in Boise. Want to get in touch with you about an election ad that our stations actually have been running for a long time, that between us, I know it's not true. That's just the nature of election ads, and do some coverage on how if you vote. Now, the ad in question in particular was faulting these three senators and saying they're against law enforcement. And yet, when Andrew broke down what the bills were in question, and there were two of them, they really had nothing to do with law enforcement. It was just up for interpretation and kind of a smear ad. And here's the stern cop looking at the camera and, oh, this is terrible. This is outrageous. Why? They support open borders. They support fentanyl and human trafficking. These senators, vote them out. They're not Idaho. And Andrew Bartline rightly called it out as false. Now, Senator Lenny, I think, rightly said, look, I don't have any interest in talking with you. And I can understand that, okay, from the standpoint of candidates who have been on the receiving end of some of the media treatment, you were right-wing radicals. Everyone is, a far-right conservative or somehow radicalized. Basically sitting through an interview filled with trick bag questions, which are then taken back and edited so that your answers fit whatever the prevailing narrative is that reporter's going after. That's the rule rather than the exception. But as I mentioned before, Andrew Bartline actually did a very good job on this, and I think covered some topics that clearly were making Brian Holmes uncomfortable, but also I think were worthwhile because they shed some light on, well, if these ads are not true, then why are they, who's paying for them? And frankly, we'll delve into that here in just a moment. But I wanted you to see that Senator Lenny says, okay, credit where credit's due. Andrew Bartline did a bang-up job peeling back the onion and exposing the absolute crud behind those attack ads that have been airing for months against conservative senators. He says, I still don't want to go on the show for obvious reasons, but he says, if Channel 7 keeps putting out stuff like this, maybe one day pigs will fly and I'll make an appearance. Okay, fair enough. Now, interestingly enough, these attack ads that have been running for months, this is something that Brian Allman reported on in the Gem State Chronicle way back in November of last year, posing the question, is Republican Governor Brad Little funding the attack on his own party's Republican senators? And if you want to go to that article, again, this is November 17th of 2023 in the Gem State Chronicle, you will find that there are some very interesting dots that are connected between political action committees that support the governor or that have donated to the governor and share an address with other political action committees that support the governor, and yet they're the ones who are funding these attack ads on these conservative senators. I mean, look, I'm offering just an interpretation here. I could be dead wrong, but it appears that the blob, at least the uniparty blob in Idaho's capital, is threatened by these senators because they insist on adhering to principle. And it can't be business as usual when you have people calling attention to people high up the food chain and in officialdom who are not holding to principle. So I would recommend do a little bit of research on this for yourself. Please don't take my word or anybody else's word for it. This is kind of the whole point. Why does Fred Reed say democracy is typically, a public that knows nothing? It's because too many people want to take the path of least resistance. Either they don't trust themselves to do their own research or to come to their own conclusions. And then like baby birds, they just want to sit there with their mouths open and wait for someone to spoon feed to them. What should I think? What should I believe about this? That's a recipe for disaster. And I don't care if the people who are doing the spoon feeding are coming from the political right or the political left. It's a situation that will put you into dependency on others to tell you what to think. And that's a very, very bad thing. Now, here's the other side of the hysteria, though. Well, what if someone is actually giving us all sides of a story? That's a good thing, right? No, says, the Idaho Statesman via a piece that they republished from Tom Healer that was originally written for the Kansas City Star. Look at this headline. Democracy is in peril because both sides journalists let MAGA spread disinformation. All right. I sense some disapproval here on the part of Mr. Healer. Let's take a look at some of his specific concerns. Tom Healer says, they say democracy dies in darkness. That's what the Washington Post has been telling us anyway, ever since MAGA rose to power in 2017. Our daily reminder that without a free press to shine light on wayward politicians, democracy will eventually succumb to bad actors like, in his opinion, Donald Trump and his pro-Vladimir Putin enablers in Congress. You can already see he's kind of going off the rails here, but please stick with me. It's worth it to see his conclusion. He says, I never liked that slogan, not because it's a little too melodramatic, but because it's wrong. Our democracy, gag, is in peril because of today's free press, not for the want of it. Let me put this into simpler terms, okay? I'm a simple guy, so we'll put this in terms even I can understand. Mr. Healer is telling us that the problem is there's too much information out there and you can't handle the truth. How do you feel about that? I don't necessarily think he's right. I think he's actually, as full of it as a Christmas goose. But democracy is in peril because of today's free press, not for want of it. Okay, tell us more, would you please? He calls it blue sky journalism, which is basically referring to journalists who actually go to the effort of trying to provide a more well rounded view or at least get as many sides as possible. He says it's more insidious and dangerous than yellow journalism because it's subtle and slick and classy, in the same way that slick and subtle, classy racism is more effective than a mulleted screamer with a pointy white hood and a tiki torch he got on sale at a big box store. Blue sky journalism is respectable because it's perpetrated by respectable journalists who probably don't shop there. Folks who move with ease in the bluest of circles like Anderson Cooper, Chris Licht, Carrie Budoff Brown, and Leslie Stahl. Okay, these are all reliable establishment mouthpieces. Please go on. All right, Tom Healer says, inevitably in today's rating-obsessed newsrooms, for every Jake Tapper or Margaret Brennan or Abby Phillip with a backbone to say no, meaning to say no to presenting as many sides as possible and let you make up your mind, there's a Caitlin Collins with the ambition to say yes, to platform a demagogue in the name of fairness to both sides. At least that's what she tells herself, presumably in makeup before going on the air. Mirror, mirror on the wall, I do this not for ratings at all. I do this all because I'm a good, objective, nonpartisan journalist, and doggone it, both sides deserve to be heard. Now, I know he's saying, well, so she's platforming demagogues. According to whom? I mean, if it's just his word, then why should we take his word over the journalist who is actually trying to get more information out there or get as many sides out there as possible? Mr. Healer doesn't really want to address that. But do they really present both sides? Do they really, present fair, objective reporting? And here's where he completely goes off the rails and falls apart. Russian disinformation deserves its rightful place in our American town hall conversation. Well, again, Russian disinformation according to whom? Who's making that distinction? Do you not trust your audience to be able to sift through this and say, this sounds like disinformation, or this sounds like it's being spun to favor the Kremlin? He says, that's the hill you're planting your fair and balanced flag on? Well, no, that's, where his hyperbole is telling us we're planting it, but that doesn't necessarily reflect reality. Our former Republican vice president's daughter, Liz Cheney, deserves to be heard. Yes, she was heard plenty during the J6 Muppet show. That committee was quite the production, and it was made for television. Her fellow former GOP representative, Adam Kinzinger, deserves to be heard. Again, he's had no problem getting sycophants in the mainstream press and basically uniparty mouthpieces to put his views forth. Past GOP presidential candidate, Senator Mitt Romney, again, a uniparty figurehead, deserves to be heard. Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene does not. And I have to ask, why not? If it's so self-evident that she is up in the night or that she is, promoting misinformation, why not let people see that for themselves? Wouldn't that be enough to convince? Or are you worried people will hear something and maybe start to question the narrative that Mr. Healer is trying to push? I suspect it's probably the latter, but only he can say for sure. Now, here come the really dire warnings. Blue sky journalism is going to get a lot of people killed if it delivers the Electoral College to MAGA in November. Oh boy, we're starting in early on, this is the end of the world if Trump has returned to power. By the way, have you noticed how much electoral mojo the man has been collecting despite everything that they're throwing at him? Maybe the people who have been pushing this narrative that, he's going to be the end of our civilization are basically creating a self-fulfilling prophecy. It is going to be the end of civilization. They're going to end it because they don't want him to do it, right? Destroy the village in order to save it. Anyway. And the violence won't start with SEAL Team 6 knocking on Rachel Maddow's door. Instead, he says Trump will follow his Russian mentor's playbook by giving all the Proud Boys out there the only thing they need, a wink and a nod. And then he goes completely off the rails here. These are the kinds of people who would drag a 14-month-old puppy to a gravel pit and blow its brains out, for goodness sake. Sorry, Kristi Noem, but that was a really unfortunate thing that became public, and very few people who have lived on farms or have worked with livestock or worked with animals and understand that sometimes that's a regrettable necessity. But I don't think she was doing it, to earn brownie points. Nonetheless, in the court of public opinion, this is not working in her favor. These are the kinds of people who would kill 100,000 Ukrainians just to make Russia's coin-operated grocery carts great again. Yeah, what about the people who keep sending them money and weapons and telling them fight to the last Ukrainian? That would be members of the U.S. Congress, wouldn't it? Wouldn't that be members of the press, with the people with all the little Ukrainian lapel pins? Okay, it's funny that the blame only seems to run one way, which makes Mr. Healer's conclusions pretty suspect. So he says, do not underestimate MAGA's willingness to make the hard choices that need to be made. I can't help but feel, but this is some pretty serious projection on his part. This is someone who apparently sounds willing to round up and liquidate those who disagree with him. But he's accusing, of course, his opponents of doing this, something which is pretty common for the left wing. And by the way, why hasn't SEAL Team 6 issued a statement yet? If the Supreme Court was spitballing my name as some kind of depraved homicidal slave to Trump, I'd want very much to set the record straight. Why do we all just know that in a second Trump turn? Why do we all just know this? Do we really all know this? The makeup of SEAL Team 6 will go from 90% MAGA to 100% MAGA. Again, this is this individual's fertile imagination. If we let Trump back in the White House again, are we going to need SEAL Team 7 to protect us from SEAL Team 6? I mean, there's some real fear here. Unfortunately, it's all based in fantasy and what might happen as opposed to what's actually happening right now, which is the turning of the justice system on its head. So Tom Healer comes to the point here and says, okay, here's the point. We are on our own. There isn't going to be a Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein to turn darkness to light and save the day this time. The world just doesn't work that way anymore. If anything, he says there's too much light, and it's blinding us to the danger we're in. For the news media has lit up our politics like the clear blue sky, less in the name of fair and objective journalism, or less in the name of fair and objective journalism, and more in the name of TV ratings mastermind Arthur C. Nielsen. You can't handle the truth, is what he's telling us. And so he says, our only hope is us, we the people, on Tuesday, November 5th, 2024. And should we fail that day, well, he says, I don't know about you, but I'd be willing to jump in front of a bullet to protect Liz Cheney, and I disagree with almost everything she's ever said. Wow, I hope he gets the help he needs. But look, the point here is simply this. You can be trusted to sift the facts, to weigh the evidence and weigh the information in front of you, and to decide for yourself. You don't need some blow-dried spinmeister to tell you, now this is what you have to think. But apparently this editorialist says, no, you do. The problem isn't too much free speech. The problem isn't, oh, there's so much misinformation out there. There is a lot of misinformation out there, but the responsibility for being able to effectively navigate beyond it and to discard what is useless and to hold what's useful, that's on us. Now, thankfully, there are some good resources to help us in that regard. In fact, I'm happy to tell you that right now, the Idaho Freedom Index from the Idaho Freedom Foundation is readily available. Go to idahofreedom.org if you would like to find out more. This is less about telling you who to vote for and more about telling you how the people who are in power right now voted, how they conducted themselves, how their votes affected both the size and scope of government, the cost of government, and more importantly, how it affected your personal freedom. Now, see, the decision is up to you. If you're a person who's averse to freedom, you can see who scores very low on that freedom index, and I guess you would vote accordingly. On the other hand, if you're someone who prizes your personal freedom, who prizes fiscal responsibility on the part of those who represent you, you'll also see very clearly, not by their words, but by their actions, by the way they voted, who would be the better choice. And that's the key. It's not a matter of, well, we just all have to, wet our finger and put it up in the air and hope that we pick somebody, who's a decent candidate. If you're going to go and vote, don't be a low information voter. Take the time to get to really know what the issues are, who the people are. And again, that Freedom Index is a very powerful tool. It's not the only tool, but it's a powerful tool for helping you sift the ones who just talk the talk versus the ones who actually walk the walk. I'm Brian Hyde, and this is Nowhere to Hide.
Press Club or bias all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot.
That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
Dark money is influencing policy.